Okay, welcome to Rock Docs Episode 1. I'm David Lizerbram.
I'm Andrew Keatts.
And before we get into the main topic today, which is Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese. I think I'm just going to repeat that unwieldy title every time because
it does say so much about it.
It really does.
Like, I think actually if you just heard that title, you could be like, all right, I'll listen to this podcast.
Okay. Well,
I'll
you go.
Skip the film and just get the secondhand reading.
Well, before we get to that, I have a question for you.
All right, shoot.
If Christopher Nolan directed a rock doc, who or what would it be about?
Wow. If Christopher Nolan, and look, I suspect over the course of time we're going to get into the auteur-director dabbling in rock doc genre, which is almost worthy of its own podcast series.
We're going to get into that probably in about 10 minutes. So before we get to that.
We're here, right. If Christopher Nolan did a rock doc, what would the topic be? I think Christopher Nolan's entry into the rock doc canon would be... I think it would be bad. I think it would be a really bad film and a band I didn't like that much. Although I like Christopher Nolan, I think it would be like... I don't know, like Linkin Park?
Okay. Linkin Park. Why does that come to mind?
Like a tour gone wrong with Linkin Park, where the pieces are not fitting together.
Okay.
But or something. I don't know.
Okay, Linkin Park.
Yeah, that's my thought.
So I was thinking more like a 70s prog rock British group.
Okay, yeah. So like Yes.
Like Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, maybe King Crimson.
Okay, so you're saying this makes...
Emerson, Lake and Palmer?
Yeah, there's a lot like early Genesis.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Before Phil Collins era Genesis.
Yeah.
I could see Christopher Nolan being into that.
Well, certainly I see like the excess.
Yes.
The appeal to absolute excess.
Yeah.
And intricate compositions.
Yes.
That still somehow don't actually make a great deal of sense.
Yes.
It's
exactly.
Like everything has been thought through, except no one was like, let's make sure it's fully coherent, though.
But a lot of stuff is happening.
But a lot of stuff is happening. Like,
a lot of things happening.
All right, I think
Michael Caine is involved somehow.
Yeah, Michael Caine is
Somehow.
he's the he introduces them.
The narrator or something, or somehow he was involved.
Plays like the Bill Graham part.
Yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm. So, okay, and I'm not saying this to be pro or con Christopher Nolan.
Oh, Christopher Nolan's great.
Sure. Okay.
But let's not pretend anybody understands what any of those movies are about.
Separate conversation. But in terms of a movie that everybody understands what it's about.
Yes.
Let's talk about 2019 Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese.
Thank you.
I don't need to say who the director is because we've already said it.
He's right there.
All right. First take on this.
Yeah.
Somebody says, Andy,
yeah,
what is the deal with this movie? Tell me what it is.
All right, where I would start and where we should start is that the footage, the live concert footage and the backstage footage, the tour footage, which are, let's be clear, like that's the bones of any good rock doc, are second to none. 10 out of 10.
Okay.
Can't say enough about
the vintage in the day footage.
The footage that like you probably haven't seen that much footage from this tour. You've probably seen a lot of footage from other Dylan tours if you like Dylan a lot. It's perfect.
Okay.
The live performances on this documentary are incredible.
Okay.
Starting off right out of the gate, when you come in with ISIS, is like, I could watch that and only that.
Not the terrorists, the song.
Right. This is not ISIS-K, not ISIL, but the Bob Dylan original Bob Dylan composition ISIS.
All right. Well, let's set the scene. Okay, so this documentary is, or this film, this story, is about a particular. It's not just about Bob Dylan's life or whatever, which a lot of rock docs are, which we will certainly talk about. A lot of rock docs that are like they were born here and this was the rise and fall. But this is about like 2 months, approximately, in 1975.
75. Although they want to give you the impression in the film that it's 1976.
Sure,
it isn't.
Just throwing a little bit of that, bicentennial flavor.
Yeah.
But it's about a tour that Dylan did with a traveling group of characters.
Yeah.
You got Joan Baez, you got Roger McGuinn from the Byrds, you got all kinds of different people, which we could get into.
Yes.
Poets and different people. It was not
Ginsberg.
your...
Allen Ginsberg.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was not your typical rock tour where, like, you just, 6 months before you get a notice, like, hey, they're going to be playing this stadium. Like, they just kind of went on a bus that often Bob seemed to have been driving.
Often
as
Bob
the documentary will have you believe.
Yes. Well, and so I felt very strongly that was probably an affectation,
right?
That he was not actually driving often.
It seemed like a bit, but he's wearing different hats.
Totally. And I listened to an interview. I did some supplementary reading and listening for this show.
Okay, I'm glad one of us did.
And I listened to an interview with Roger McGuinn, Byrds legend, Roger McGuinn, longtime friend of Bob Dylan, who was on this tour, and he said indeed that Bob Dylan did drive often, and that for certain stretches of this tour, his wife and kids came along. That's not included in the movie at all, but that often, so he had like his own van RV situation that he would drive.
Okay.
As part of this caravan of this rambling carnival of, many of them 60s era legends who are, having this very ramshackle tour in the rock excess of the mid-70s.
And they would just show up in towns, more or less. Like, they would just show up in a smallish town.
Yeah, town
and be
is
like,
the right...
hey, today, tomorrow, at your local, community center, Bob Dylan and friends are playing.
Yes.
Come check it out.
Yeah, it was, like, often you'll hear the term, like, secondary market tour is, like, a rock terminology. Like, we're not going to Chicago, New York. We're going to Richmond, Virginia...
Sure.
And
Providence.
And Trent.
Right.
Providence. This isn't even that. It's not even like a tertiary tour. Like, they opened the tour in Plymouth.
Right.
Which is, I think, pretty clearly a statement of some kind about what type of tour they're doing, that they chose Plymouth.
That's also where America opened its tour.
Yeah.
The country.
Right. Even more ramshackle than this one.
Yes. Even more of a disaster.
Even more of a disaster. Even more fictional. And then they also, like, there's 3 specific shows that make it in that they go to a Mahjong tournament that I think was in like on Cape Cod. They go to a correctional facility, which is where Reuben Hurricane Carter, the subject of the film Hurricane, was held at the time. And they go to an Indian reservation in upstate New York. So there's like they're very much like a traveling circus more than they are a major arena tour. And I think that is so the chronology of Bob Dylan. That was very much in response to Tour 74 that he did the year before this, which was him and the band getting back together. His first live concerts in 8 years?
Yeah,
since he had
at least
last
a tour.
Yeah, at least a tour, right?
Yeah, he hadn't played. Yeah, he hadn't played since '66, since his quote unquote motorcycle accident. Really well.
Let's get into that.
Yeah, maybe it happened.
Let's
maybe
get into
it did.
The Dylan stuff,
right.
Or maybe it was serious.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't. Right?
Yeah. So I'm just going to say, just putting a flag in the ground.
Yeah.
I have no critical distance when it comes to Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's my guy.
Yeah. Okay.
If I was on Mark
So
Maron,
Mark
he would be
Maron's
like, "Who
here,
are your
he's like,
guys?"
"Who
I'd
are
be
your
like,
guys?"
"Bob Dylan was my guy."
Okay.
So
great.
so I'm not here to say anything's good or bad. I do. I like getting into the theories about Bob. So any aspect of his life is up for debate. It's like, the Kennedy assassination or something, and so the motorcycle accident is one of them. But that was years before this,
Yes.
the Rolling Thunder Revue. So he did this big stadium tour that made a lot of money, and it was, kind of a 70s rock, iconic tour.
David Geffen threw it together, basically.
Sure.
Right.
And then after that, in typical Bob fashion, he zigged and zagged and decided to do this weird thing with a bunch of his friends, just kind of showing up places. And this was the time for people that have, a little bit of knowledge of Bob, but aren't deep weirdos like me, that he was doing the Blood on the Tracks album, sometimes considered his best album or one of the best albums. Mm-hmm. He was dealing with issues in his marriage that some people believe the album was about, because everything about the album seems to be that way, except he says it wasn't. Yeah. And then he was also kind of working on the Desire album, which most of the songs, or many of the songs on the tour, are from that era. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the era we're in terms of Bob. This is not the blowing in the wind, classic 60s Bob. This is not the grizzled, gnarly old 90s, 2000s Bob. No. This is kind of a mid-period situation.
And it's not the Tour 74 Bob with Robbie Robertson and the band, where they're playing to arenas and stadiums, giant crowds. That my understanding is that Bob fans don't especially love that tour, and that Bob himself didn't especially love that tour, and decided to do this because he didn't really like what he had been doing. He wanted to do something a little bit more artistic, a little bit more creative.
Right. It was kind of like I can make a fortune going out and playing the hits for the rest of my life and just call it a career, but that's kind of not my vibe. That's the sense I get. Yeah. Also, while he was doing that, and the reason why we have all this footage is because he decided that he, like many 70s rock artists, was also a visionary movie director, although he had never, in fact, directed a movie. So at the time that he was doing this tour, he had a film crew filming him for a kind of experimental movie called Ronaldo and Clara, which admittedly I have not seen, even as a sort of Bob obsessive. I've not seen it. But a lot of the footage that
not a well-regarded film, even among Bob obsessives.
Right, exactly. This is not The Godfather. This is, So,
although it is longer than The Godfather. It's a 4-hour movie.
Apparently so. I've not seen it, though. So anyway, where we are here is that Bob's on this crazy tour. He's filming this experimental artsy movie. He's with all of his friends and companions from over the years, popping up in small towns. And then it kind of happened, and it was just a thing that happened in his history. And then, 40, 50 years later, Martin Scorsese comes along and somehow takes that footage and, interspersed with new interview footage, assembles this 2019 documentary about it for Netflix. So that's really what we have here. Yes. That's what we were presented. Like when I knew this was coming out, which I was very eager to see it, that's what the marketing told me it was going to be.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Well, I guess this is about time to get into the curveball in this film, because why would you want to just take pristine archival footage shot by a professional video crew that follows you throughout one of your better tours,
right? Of a genius at the peak of his creativity.
At the peak of his creativity, why would you want to just allow one of the best directors to ever live to put that together expertly?
Right.
Why would you not want?
That's not enough.
No,
that's not sufficient.
You need a hook.
And this podcast is spoiler heavy. Let's just say, for people who are listening, most of the time talking about rock documentaries, spoilers are not really an issue, and we'll just tell you what happens in the movie, and you can, if you've seen it, great, and if you haven't, whatever. Yeah. In this particular case, maybe you want to hit pause, watch the movie, and come back if you haven't seen it, because it's going to get a little weird.
Although, also, you don't need to, because the weirdness that they have... Here's a take I have on this film.
Good yes ending.
The weirdness that Scorsese introduces into this film, so far as I can tell, is completely immaterial. All right, so let's get into it. Basically,
lay it out there.
There are a series of complete fabrications, or fictionalizations if you prefer, that are introduced into this film to give it some sort of narrative structure. If you've already seen it, there is a director who is introduced as Van Dorff.
Sure. We all know Van Dorff.
That guy did not direct this film. He is an actor. He is Bette Midler's husband.
But wait, there's interviews with him in a contemporary setting in a fancy-looking library-type house, part of a house, where he talks about how he was brought on by Bob to direct this footage.
And his vision and the ideas he had and what an important creative edge he was bringing to this project.
And in the vintage footage, you kind of offhand, like off the side, hear people talking to him.
Yes. Bob Dylan. You hear Bob Dylan, which it was...
Is this whole thing a deep fake?
Yeah.
What did we watch?
They have 2019 or 2017 Bob Dylan overdubbing in his own voice over footage from 1975 as if he's talking to this guy that does not exist.
Okay, so there is no Van Dorff. He is an actor.
He is an actor.
Okay.
Playing the director.
Okay.
Yes.
But wait. There's also...
Yes, there's also the promoter of the film is named Jim Giannoulis.
Yeah, the promoter of the tour, who talks about like being the bag man, getting stuff done. We can't tell you everything that happened. It was the 70s, whatever.
Yeah. And he is actually a Paramount executive who they've hired to bring in. And so here's where you can kind of start to see the hair on this whole thing, is that he's not a good actor.
Right.
in the game show where it's like you have to decide which one is playing the actual person. He would be the easy person to give away. But this is where it also starts to get fuzzy for me about why we're doing any of this. Because he's a Paramount executive that they hire to be an actor, to pretend to be the promoter. And like, what is the fictional story of being the promoter that he introduces? He just says, yeah, I was brought in and, what I did is I brought the capital and you put up the money and you book the tour, you bring in the vans and the catering and you book the hotels and the venues. And then hopefully you make enough money on the gate to cover all your expenses and then hopefully a little bit more. It's literally just
right. That's it.
Just an off-the-shelf description of what promoting a tour is. I have no idea why it was necessary to introduce a fictionalized version that is the most mundane cliche you could right. introduce.
Like maybe the guy that actually did that isn't around anymore or wouldn't participate. So they're like, let's just bring an actor in. But wait, hold on. Let's hit pause on this.
Okay.
So you and I had both seen this.
Yeah.
In its initial release, which was on Netflix. It may have been in the theaters, for a limited
some art house films.
But basically, it was a Netflix production.
Yeah.
So I watched it the day it came out in 2019.
Me too.
I did not know about any of this.
No, me neither. And I skipped right past all this stuff.
So when you watch,
it's so
when you
unexceptional.
So when you're watching it in the time, as best as you can recall, Van Dorf and this other guy, like you're just like, okay, yeah, this is just documentary footage and a guy talking about some stuff that happened.
That's correct.
Is that right?
That is correct.
Because that's where I was. I was like, okay, whatever. This Van Dorf guy, I guess, was the reason we have this footage. Okay.
Yeah, and if I were editing it, I would
seem like a character, but everybody's a character.
Sure. And if I were editing it, I probably would have suggested clipping the promoter because his story is he's not even telling an interesting story.
Okay.
He's literally just like so I went to Hertz. And I talked to the guy at Hertz. I'm going to need 6 vans, and he told me $35 a van, and I said, "How about 32?" It's not interesting.
Okay, then we have sometime Martin Scorsese collaborator and superstar Sharon Stone shows up.
Now, here I can at least give them credit. This was a creative fabrication.
Sure.
And Sharon Stone proceeds to explain that she was a teenage model. Like an under 18 model. The tour swept through her New England town, and her mom were together when Bob Dylan was out walking around among the townspeople, and he liked her Kiss T-shirt.
Right, the band Kiss.
The band Kiss.
Who was popular in 1975. So,
yeah.
But not, okay, we can get into that.
Yeah, and then invites them backstage and other people, and then invites Sharon Stone on the tour as a under 18 model who she hangs out with and like irons Joan Baez's clothes, and that he tells her that he wrote the song just like a woman for her and that she's a child, so she doesn't quite understand yet that it's a 10-year-old song.
Right.
And she kind of cries in her little Talking Heads clip.
Yeah.
About, sort of like sweetly about what an interesting and important time it was for her. Right. None of that is true.
None of that ever happened.
None of that ever happened. It's just something that Martin Scorsese inserted into this otherwise straightforward concert movie.
But here's the thing, right? So like in the contemporary footage, interview footage of Bob Dylan, he talks about Kiss, the band Kiss.
Yes.
Because in the actual Rolling Thunder tour, famously, Bob wore this weird kind of white face makeup.
Yes.
So if you see any pictures, if you just, Google image search Bob Dylan Rolling Thunder Tour, you'll see Bob wearing like a Stetson and like kind of a cowboy type outfit and like white face makeup all over his face.
Yeah.
And that was just his look for the tour. Yeah. So he's sort of implying, or basically says, like, Sharon Stone wore this Kiss t-shirt and then he was interested in Kiss because they wore makeup, so he wore makeup for the tour, even though he was already wearing the makeup at that point in the tour, and none of this actually happened.
Yes.
So is this an attempt to explain or make the viewer make some sense about the makeup choice he wore, or is it just random?
So there's a couple things that are said in the movie about so there's like 5 or 6 different clips of people putting on or taking off masks. And he says, I think I wrote the quote down here. We didn't have enough masks on that tour. We should have had masks for everybody. When somebody wears a mask, he's going to tell you the truth. When he's not, it's highly unlikely. So there's something about it. He's like playing with the idea of masking yourself frees you to be more honest, and yet the film is being actively dishonest, including about his wearing of a mask, so to speak, in this white face that he wears.
Right, but he's sort of always done that from day one. Like, his name isn't really Bob Dylan.
Sure.
He, in his very early interviews, made up stories about living in New Mexico or all these other things that are not true.
Yeah.
And his entire career, more or less, he's
playing with the truth.
Playing with these sort of characters, and that's kind of his deal.
That is kind of his deal. Yes.
So, and it's kind of like, if you like this thing that Bob does, here's more of it.
Yeah. And so lastly, there's a politician in the end,
sure,
who is not a real politician,
right,
and who is actually he's a relatively recognizable actor,
right,
from what Altman movies,
yeah, and he'd played this same politician, Bob Roberts, in other movies,
okay,
and like kind of TV series in like the 80s and 90s,
yeah.
So if you're familiar with that, which I wasn't super like, I know of it, but I never seen it. Yeah. And I wouldn't recognize the guy now, like as that guy, then, if you were a person who was a fan of that, you would have immediately said, wait a minute, this is, it's like, hey, I'm Vito Corleone. You know what I mean? It's like, right. That's a character from a movie that you're playing. That was, anyway.
Yeah, like Richard Belzer.
He shows up and he claims that Jimmy Carter got him into the Bob tour.
Yeah.
And there's pictures of Jimmy Carter, and it's a whole thing.
Sidebar on that, there's a photo of Bob Dylan actually going to the White House to meet Jimmy Carter, and if you see in the background, Richard Manuel from the band is there.
Right.
Excellent. Just Richard Manuel at his absolute most haunting.
Yeah.
Standing between Bob Dylan and Jimmy Carter in the White House. I would pay money for that photograph. It is incredible.
It is a good photograph, except Jimmy Carter wasn't in the White House in 1975.
No, he was not
He did not become president until January 1977.
Yeah, exactly.
So that doesn't make sense.
No, yes. So there's all these things, and I don't know, like, the more I think about it, I actually think it's like there's actually not that much to say about it. I think the first time I watched it, and then all these things didn't really fit together, and then there were a bunch of articles that came out within the week that this published about like what's true and what's not in the movie. And then once you wrap your head around it, once you read up on what is not true, all the things that we've spelled out here, I mean, I guess it's sort of like putting a spotlight on the artifice of a documentary at all, that like it's so curated and it's so considered that it isn't documentary fact at all. It's an affectation. It's a version of events that a band is trying to give you.
Would you say it's a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese?
Yeah, and it's like, so there's like, you could be somewhat high-minded about it, but it's not actually all that profound. If I'm honest, I think it's just that Bob Dylan is embarrassed about like putting himself as out there as it would require to be earnest about this. I think Bob Dylan is just like, he's like, well, I can't just do this straightforward. There's got to be a prank.
Right.
Can I be a prankster a little bit? And they're like, okay, it doesn't really advance this story in any interesting way. And he's like, I know, but like, it'll make people uneasy.
So you think Scorsese was just like, well, I'm friends with Sharon Stone.
Yeah. Well, so that was what I thought. And then I listened to these interviews, and all the other people who were on the tour, like, really didn't give it much thought. They're like, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, the movie's kind of just a straightforward version of what happens, and then there's these 4 fictionalizations that are interspersed through it. But they didn't seem to give it much thought at all, if I'm honest.
All right, let's talk about the other people on the tour.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
There's the whole weird pseudo-documentary aspect, but then there's like 90% of the movie, which is more or less a actual documentary or uses documentary footage of the tour.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people involved.
A lot of people involved. One thing that doesn't come across that I think if you just did a more straightforward tour documentary, you'd get a better understanding of like what the show was like, how it was structured.
Right.
Like Ronnie Hawkins makes an appearance in the movie, but we never see any concert footage of Ronnie Hawkins.
Right. Nor do they explain who Ronnie Hawkins is to the 99.9% of people who don't know who that is or care.
No, and in Ronaldo and Clara, he plays Bob Dylan.
Okay.
And I don't even know if Ronnie Hawkins was on this tour. I think it's entirely possible that Ronnie Hawkins was not on this tour.
Okay. Yeah. Here's the thing. It's like this documentary is weird. So they don't just say like, "Here's who was on this tour."
Here's the bill.
Joan Baez.
First, this guy would come out
who sang with Bob Dylan famously in the '60s, and Roger McGuinn from the Byrds, who and Tebow and Burnett, who became this big producer, and Mick
Ronson as the
guitar player from Ziggy Stardust.
Which also incredible that Ronson gets off of the Ziggy Stardust tour and then hooks up with the Rolling Thunder Revue tour like 6 months later.
Yeah.
Almost instantaneously.
Kind of a different vibe. Everybody else is like an Americana artist.
Yeah.
And then you have this British shredder guitar player
and
wailing on a Les Paul.
And he's like dressed like he should be on stage with like The Who.
Yeah, exactly. Like David Bowie, The Who. Right, exactly. Like he's not going for this whole mystical Native American cowboy vibe.
Yes.
He just showed up and it's like, yeah, hey mate, you want me to show up on this tour? Sure.
And I'll just shred. I mean, there's like the sections of the tour when Dylan's performing, there's like 6 guitarists on stage.
Yeah.
And now I gotta say, they sound tight.
Yeah.
They sound awesome. Like and Dylan is just shouting. I mean, he is just singing so loud and he's so locked in. Yeah. There's concert footage of Dylan over the years where he looks almost ambivalent sometimes, and he seems so energized and so into this tour. I mean, which is part of what makes the footage come to life. I mean, it's so good. Him and Joan Baez singing together sound like it's like I don't know when the last time they had sung together before this tour was, but it's like they had been doing it nonstop since '63.
Right, and he says in the contemporary footage something like, we harmonize together so well.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to think about it at all. We sing together and it just happens. And the energy level on the tour, I mean, I will confess that while watching this again for this podcast, I freezed at one point this still of Bob and Roger McGuinn. They're both on screen singing. And their eyes are super wide.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And I freeze framed it, took a picture, sent it to some friends, and the caption was, "Cocaine's a hell of a drug."
Yes,
because
absolutely.
There was clearly, I mean, Bob is on fire, but it's not clearly just a matter of...
Yeah, that's during Knocking on Heaven's Door, right?
Yeah.
At the very end. Yeah. So what Roger McGuinn is doing in that, I do not like it. It does not make me feel comfortable, and I was kind of like, all right, let's get McGuinn out of here. Because that's like the most McGuinn we get in the whole movie, and I was like, could do with a little bit of less McGuinn here.
Yeah, they never really tell you like, here's who was on the tour, here's the format, here's the deal, here's what you would have seen if you would. Like, there's a lot of concert footage, but it's all kind of scattered, and it's not from the same show, and it's not, but I mean, like you said, the performances are the greatest. I mean,
good.
Incredibly great. So if you're listening to this and you're like, this sounds weird, I don't really care about watching Sharon Stone pretend that she was in a concert in 1975, cool.
Yeah.
Great. But if you're listening to this, I'm here to tell you, you will get so much out of watching this because the performances are, without exception, unbelievably great.
Absolute platinum, sterling performance.
This is not a bit. This is the best footage you will ever see of people performing music.
Well, and so I to go back a little bit to where we were talking about the weird, hook of the Scorsese fictionalizing this stuff is. I got so caught up on it on previous rewatches. I was like, what is Scorsese trying to say here? What is Bob Dylan trying to say with this? This most recent time, I was like, oh, it doesn't matter at all. And in fact, it's quite a distraction from what is otherwise a straightforward tour movie with fantastic performances. And so if you just kind of put all that stuff out of your head, it's an easy watch and it's really good.
Sure. Yeah. You just hang out and then you look up and there's Bob Dylan singing one of his great songs, and it's one of the best performances you've ever done, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and so I still don't know whether. So apparently, from what I read and looked into, these shows were between 3 and 3.5 hours typically. which is a long show for the time.
Mm-hmm.
They would open with Ginsberg, and there was another poet on the tour who I was not familiar with. Would each do a few minutes each of readings, and then there would be a longer concert period. Now, I don't know, like, if McGuinn got his own time on stage without Bob.
Right. Did he sing Turn, Turn, Turn or something?
Right, yeah. Or whatever.
Right. So you want to be a rock and roll star.
Yeah,
or,
exactly,
whatever.
yeah. It's that Bayou song that Petty covers.
Born in the Bayou? That's
no, it's a different one. It's like King of the Bayou or something. It's like him trying to do a Dr. John type send-up.
Got it, yeah. Okay. Right. Did Joan Baez do some of her hits?
Own time?
Yeah. Did everybody do their hits or what?
Yeah. So I think it sounds like maybe McGuinn did have some time on his own because he said that he would play, and that I think that footage of Joan Baez doing a pretty wild dance that seems like out of character for Joan Baez.
Right. Yes.
I think that was during a McGuinn set.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think so. The Joan Baez dance sequence, I'm not sure we can capture in podcast format the description of the dance, but she does a funky dance.
She does a funky dance, and she is like letting loose. She is not self-aware during that moment.
Usually you see Joan Baez in interviews or even just performing, and she's kind of like buttoned up and just kind of like very proper.
Yeah.
Like she has this regal bearing, and she's just like a person.
Queen of folk rock. Yeah,
she's like a person who commands respect.
Yes.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
But then you see her getting funky, and it's something.
Yes, exactly. And so, like, I don't know, did Ronnie Hawkins do anything on the story? None of that stuff is clear in the movie.
Right.
It's also basically immaterial, I think.
All right, let's get into Joni.
Yes. So the narrative furthered in this movie, I don't know if it's true, is that basically they come through one town or another, and Joni Mitchell is in town, so she comes to see him, and she's so swept up in the energy and the creativity and the excitement of the Rolling Thunder Revue that she latches on. And she's
just like, I'm on the bus.
Yeah. She does one show, and then she's like, I'm going wherever you guys go.
Okay.
We never see, there is no concert footage of Joni Mitchell performing in this movie.
Right. There's not one frame of evidence of Joni performing on stage.
Yes.
We do see her performing.
Yes.
Twice.
And both incredible.
Yeah.
So they sing Love Potion No. 9 on the bus.
Right. The like 50s pop,
yes.
Lieber and Stoller classic.
And she's like singing it so well.
She's nailing it.
And it's like
she could, you're like, Joni Mitchell could have been in a girl group in 1961.
Yes.
And like doo-wop style, and it would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Because she's great.
And it's like, get me on that bus. Like, it's just like classic tour bus footage. Somebody's like playing the back of their guitar. And right. It's Love Potion No. 9. Everybody knows the words, so everybody's just belting it.
Right.
It's great. And then she plays Coyote in Gordon Lightfoot's apartment in Canada.
Sure.
And they have the footage, and this checks out. Apparently, she wrote it on tour.
Right. So she's in this apartment, and they're all crammed in a room. Bob is like strumming the guitar.
Gordon Lightfoot's there.
Gordon Lightfoot, for whatever reason, is there.
Yeah.
And some of the other tour members.
And McGuinn.
McGuinn, yeah. And there's various other people from the tour are just hanging out, jamming in this room. And she plays you watch her play the entire song, Coyote, in like one, uncut take.
Yeah. Which at that time would have been like an unheard song. Now it's like one of Joni Mitchell's most well-known songs,
right?
Maybe, but.
Yeah, and it's mesmerizing. I mean, you see Bob Dylan like sitting right next to her, strumming along like the chords, and he's just like, "Is this really happening?" Like you can see, like it's like one of the most disarming moments of him, and just in terms of like, it's like, oh my god, like this is the real deal. Like it's like somebody watching Bob Dylan. Like it's the only time he gets to see somebody.
Yes.
The way he gets to react to somebody the way they react to him.
I actually think there's another moment in the movie where he is reacting to somebody I would describe it exactly as what you just said.
Okay.
Which is the Patti Smith section in the very beginning.
We forgot about Patti Smith. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah. There's another legend associated with this movie, but like unclear whether she was on the tour or not.
And like 10 minutes into the movie, she's no longer there at all.
Yeah,
and you
never hear from her again until Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize ceremony.
Right. And this was kind of before she was a thing. This was like
she's very young.
Right.
Very young. And like that's what's interesting about the Patti Smith section is like she's the young buck who's like doing something new and different. And she's like out Bob Dylaning Bob Dylan.
Right.
Bob Dylan is looking at her like the way she is looking at Bob Dylan the way Bob Dylan was like looking at Time magazine reporters in Europe in '65.
Right. You know, she's like, you're old school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm bringing the new energy.
So there's these two sections with Patti Smith. We got to get back to Joni, but there's like two sections with Patti Smith. She says she does this performance that just starts with like a rap where she's talking about
like a spoken word kind
spoken
of thing.
Word type thing about this what somebody lives in another dimension.
Yeah.
And then just breaks into this performance, and it's, again, mesmerizing. It's so good.
Right.
And I think we're left to believe that this was, they had run into her in the Village when they were like rehearsing and stuff before tour.
Right.
And that they went to see her, and Bob was like meeting her. But this was not on the Rolling Thunder Revue.
Right, yeah. I'm trying to remember if this is like addressed in her book, Just Kids, because it's right around that time, but I don't remember the details. But yeah. And I mean, he picked up Scarlett Rivera, the fiddle, violin player. A whole nother situation there.
Definitely something that needs to be addressed.
Okay. And then somehow Patti Smith at some point was on, but yeah.
Yeah. And then there's like this other section. The one where I feel like Bob Dylan is really like feels like an old man at 34 is when he's talking to her backstage and she's just telling him this story, and it's just like free-form spoken word, but it's just him and her talking backstage.
Right.
When she's talking about like this diamond that's on the baseball diamond, and the kids are kicking it around until it becomes the size of a softball.
Right.
And she starts with some story about how like she used to imagine that him and her were together, but it could be somebody else, and it doesn't matter who it is. And it's like, at first he can't tell where she's going with it, and then he can tell that she's very much going somewhere with it, and she's very composed. And it's like, honestly, it looks like he's intimidated by her to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and then she disappears.
And then she disappears, and she's not in it anymore, and they never talk about it.
But and I don't know if that's part of the footage that was meant to be or is in the Ronaldo and Clara movies. So it's in this movie, it's just kind of shown as like, here's these two people chatting backstage.
Right.
But I don't know if that was staged or like, you never know.
You never know.
All right.
Absolutely.
Getting back to Joni.
Yes.
She performs the song Coyote.
Yeah.
She claims that it was written about the tour.
Roger McGuinn claims it.
Right. Roger McGuinn claims that Joni wrote the song Coyote about the tour. However, Sam Shepard is also in the movie and was on the tour, somehow involved in the Ronaldo and Claire movie. So Sam Shepard is a famous playwright and actor.
Yeah.
And you see him on the tour and you see him interviewed, except kind of people who know this stuff know that Coyote is about him.
Yes.
So she was having an affair with him, and I mean, if you read the lyrics, it really kind of seems like it's about a guy like him. And
it doesn't seem like it's about
I'm on tour with Bob Dylan.
Yes, exactly. It doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that you can chalk that up
lines
to
on the freeway. I guess you're traveling from city to city. Sure.
You can chalk that up to Roger McGuinn's faulty memory or whatever, but it's in the movie. Like they put it in there,
and she doesn't correct it, and they're
right. Yeah. It's just left like that. But nonetheless, just watching these brilliant people performing in a hotel. I mean, that's kind of like the good stuff of almost any rock doc is like, if you can see the people performing in a hotel room or backstage just jamming on an acoustic guitar, hanging out with like random hangers-on behind them, and they're like just doing it for the love of it or to warm up, like that's always the best part of like almost any rock documentary.
Yeah, I'm thinking about in Festival Express. Have you seen Festival Express?
No.
Okay. Well, there's
I don't care for rock docs. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, in Festival Express, they go from tour stop to tour stop on a train, and all the musicians are on the same train. And there's a very, very late night where Danko, Jerry Garcia, and Janice Joplin are singing. There's a song late at night, and they're all very messed up, and they break into hysterical laughter at the end of the performance. And Jerry leans over and grabs Janice and just whispers in her ear, "God damn it, Janice, I loved you since the day I met you." And it's like, okay, I don't care. Anything else that happens in this movie, worth the price of admission right there. We just got a surreptitious moment of Jerry Garcia telling Janice Joplin he's in love with her at a 3 a.m. jam session with Danko going out of his mind.
Right. That's the goods.
That's it. That's
if you don't like that, this movie is not for you. That's what it is.
Right.
So, yeah. So you get this. So I kind of almost feel like this whole movie is just Easter eggs, almost, right?
Yeah.
Like in the way that we think of
and
it now.
false
like,
Easter eggs.
Right. Well, but still,
Yeah.
it's almost like there's tons of little stuff that's just like, if you're a fan of music and culture from the 70s and these people and then they just throw all this stuff in there.
Yeah.
Just like if you watch a Marvel movie and then you talk to some comic book person and they're like, "Whoa, that one little reference was from this issue in 1978 or whatever." And then it's like it's there if you want to look for it.
Right.
But if you're just watching it and you're like, "Hey, here's these cool famous people talking," and then there's awesome music, there's that happening too.
Right.
But there's a whole layer underneath it that you don't obviously normally get.
Yeah. So for instance, another section in the movie is they storm the Columbia Records offices with cameras in tow to demand that the company put out Hurricane, which Dylan has just written.
Right. Here comes the story of the Hurricane, famous song about Reuben Hurricane Carter, the boxer falsely accused of murder.
Yeah, Denzel movie.
Or convicted of murder.
Golden Globe nominated Denzel picture.
Right. Many years later, though.
Yeah, many years later. Also, subject of maybe the best scene in Dazed and Confused, with the hurricane is playing in the background.
Sure.
They have that. So I listened to a story. One of the guys who's in that scene when they storm the Columbia Pictures offices is Dylan's longtime friend. He just wrote a book about 50 years of friendship with Bob Dylan because he was a Duluth guy too. Lou Kemp, I believe his name is. Does that sound familiar to you?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I think so.
Lou Kemp. He's one of the guys there. He starts making these demands, and he revealed today that there's this little tidbit right when he walks in that the executives look at him and they go, "You're here again?" And he goes, "Yeah, I brought friends this time," and points to Bob. And so that was all before the tour. It comes at the end of the movie. That all happened before the tour. Just a couple days after Kemp had gone in and demanded that Columbia Records put up $100,000 to pay for the tour.
Right.
And so then a couple days later, they're like, "All right, well, let's go back and demand that they put Hurricane on the radio."
Right. Which seems like they would have done anyway.
It does seem like they would have done it anyway.
Is it really that hard to be like, "I'm Bob Dylan. I've recorded my first protest song in 10 years.
Yeah.
And I want you to put it out as a single and promote it because it's going to be popular and it's good."
Also it's an awesome song.
Yeah, like who at that time was going to say no?
Yeah, exactly. Although they do say some. I mean, I think it sounds like the subject was like how quickly they could get it out. He wanted it out immediately,
right.
And that song was not on a record for a very long time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's on Desire, but that was later. So
yeah,
it didn't just come out. So,
and they say there's like a fascinating, weird, racism of the 70s moment where they're like, I think we could get the black stations to play it.
Right. And that's shortly, I think, before in the movie they go to the Native American reservation, which is a whole other situation.
Yes, which
it
maybe read differently at the time, but it seems awfully patronizing and strange now.
Yeah, he goes to this Native American reservation. He plays this song, "The Ballad of Ira Hayes," which is most well known as a Johnny Cash song about one of the Marines, famously in the picture in Iwo Jima, raising the flag, who was Ira Hayes, who was this Native American who later became an alcoholic and died. And it's sort of this sad song about him. I mean, it's a classic song, and at the time probably was more well known. But he's like, here's Bob Dylan, noted white dude, who's singing to this whole group of Native Americans on a reservation a story about another Native, maybe that kind of flew in the 70s. It's a little awkward now.
I don't think it would be I don't think it would fly now.
No. And then you see the Native Americans presenting Bob with some trophy or prize or something. I don't know. I mean, Robbie Robertson is involved in the making of this movie, and he's famously friends with Bob, and he works with Martin Scorsese.
Yes.
He is at least part Native American, I understand. He's done a lot of music and a lot of involvement with that community, so maybe he kind of blessed it or said it was cool. I don't know. I'm really wondering what's going on backstage, or if this is Scorsese's attempt to showcase the awkwardness, because this is kind of when things go weird. So here's my kind of thought about the narrative structure of this movie.
Okay,
because there is kind of a structure.
Okay, let's
hear
hear about this. We should also tell. I bring very little to in terms of expertise to this program. You have a film degree. You're an actual film school graduate.
Yes, 1,000 years ago.
from the University of Southern California, mind you.
California gave me a degree.
All right.
In this. So I'm that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. You're also a Dylanologist and
Yes.
an actual musician.
We're burying the lead here.
Yes.
No, I mean, here's the thing. So I'm looking at this like, is this a Bob Dylan movie? Is it just a rock doc? Is it a Martin Scorsese movie? I mean, I think of it as a Martin Scorsese movie primarily.
Yeah.
A lot of the themes and things that he gets into in his movies and his documentaries are present. Like, I'm thinking like, okay, there's always a religious element to any Martin Scorsese movie, whatever it is. Mean Streets, going all the way back, all the way through. Obviously he's doing movies like Kundun and Silence, which are explicitly...
Kundun, I dig it.
Yeah, exactly. Last Temptation of Christ. There's just religious symbology in all these movies. So I'm thinking, like, who is the character or what is the thing in this movie that fills that role? Because, like, that's an itch that Scorsese always has to scratch, right? Yeah. So, at first I'm like, well, is it just Bob? Like, people are looking at him like this savior. Like, everybody's always looking up at him. He's in the spotlight. He's like this godlike figure, but...
And there's a whole section of that early on where, like, before they really get going on the tour, there's, like, audience interviews and interviews with some of the people on the crew
right.
about talking to Bob, and they all describe it in almost religious-like reverence.
Right.
And Ginsberg says at one point, like, the word was out that, like, inspired Dylan was back.
Yeah.
And, like, we all needed to get close to it.
But I think... Ginsberg is the religious figure in this movie. So the movie, like, as it starts out and as the tour starts out, you've got Allen Ginsberg, who's sort of like this, like, elf sprite type character. Yeah. He's dancing. He's like, he's just this source of, like, wisdom, like as though somebody just came down from a mountain in Nepal and had been sitting there and just had the wisdom of the universe. And you see him, like, sharing these thoughts and everybody's talking to him and looking up to him. And he's reciting like he's part of the tour. He's part of the show. Like you said, he's reciting poetry in the beginning. And then as the movie goes on, you see, first of all, he shaves his beard and puts on a suit, which is just a bad look for Allen Ginsberg. Like it's not working for him, first of all.
I also talked to somebody who thought that one of the fabrications in the film was that they actually hired David Cross to play Allen Ginsberg. And was surprised to learn, like, no, that's genuine footage of Ginsberg. Right.
That's the other Dylan movie where David Cross plays Ginsberg. But
exactly.
So you got Ginsberg, this famous poet, Howl, and this, he's reciting part of Kaddish, like some of his most famous works. He's like this font of wisdom. And then kind of midway through the movie, you see some people on the tour talking to him and saying, like, look, things are getting out of hand. It's a little hard to manage this show. We're cutting back your poetry segment. And then next thing you know, Ginsberg becomes demoted to roadie.
Yes.
Like him and this other poet are just hauling bags and moving stuff, and they're no longer really part of the tour, and then they just kind of disappear. And I feel like that is the narrative arc, meaning like Bob starts out inspired. He's with this person that he looked up to and, sort of saw as this font of wisdom, this person, who he would follow and bring along for inspiration. And then over time, things became professionalized, or they just got a little out of hand. Mm-hmm. And maybe Ginsberg tried to clean up his act. Maybe that's why he shaved his beard and started wearing a suit. Maybe it was just unrelated things. But you just see him transform into a different person, a lesser version of himself. And then he just disappears. He's basically no longer on the tour, as far as you can tell. Mm-hmm. Or he's no longer playing an important role. And I feel like that's the kind of hidden narrative, is like, here's Bob, who like was kind of lost at some point in his career. He comes back, he's inspired, he's fired up, he's doing all these things. He's bringing back Joan Baez, and he's bringing back social commentary in the Hurricane, and he's creating this great music. And then it just kind of like peters out. He loses that inspiration, whether it gets distracted, whether it's implied drug use, whether it's who knows what, marital issues.
The business of the music industry winning out.
Yeah, and they never really wrap up because there's no ending to the movie, really. No. They never say, and then this kind of fell apart. But for people who follow this stuff, like, there's a whole second part of the tour that's not in the movie, but it's much more professional. It's bigger venues. It's, announced beforehand, and it's more formalized, and generally speaking,
less well thought of.
Yeah,
frankly.
Generally speaking, most people think it was not as inspired, not as compelling as the first part. And so that's just kind of left unsaid, but it's sort of suggested, I think.
Yeah, totally. And then that, basically right after that section of what was still called the Rolling Thunder Revue, but was like no longer this portion of it that's depicted in the film, in like 76, they're playing arenas again. Almost carries you right into what you Dylan fans call like the never-ending tour. Right. And the credits of the film play over just a yearly concert listing of every show Dylan played.
Right.
Almost like the names of people who died in a terrorist attack or something. Like it's just like it's just like sheets of tour dates up through the 90s.
Right. It's like screen after screen after screen of like here's the 300 shows he played in 2002.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
the dude just COVID accepted never stopped touring after this point. And they just they showed the dates of the Rolling Thunder Revue and you're like, okay, that's relevant. And then they show like 1977, 78, and they don't call it just Bob Dylan toured. Even if he toured with the Dead, they don't say that. He toured with other people. He was part of a package, whatever. They just list it as like Bob Dylan tours. Like he just started doing this thing, and it kind of never ended. I mean, it's sort of implied that just went on forever. But are they saying the inspiration was gone? Like, I mean, clearly he's done amazing work since then. Yeah.
Well, and so in one of the interviews I listened to, they basically say like. Basically that the music of the industry or the business of the music industry won out, that sooner or later they had to recoup some losses, and so they started booking bigger and bigger venues. And I think even the section that this movie focuses on culminates at like MSG,
right?
They're no longer playing the town hall in Plymouth Rock anymore,
right?
And
it's sort of a metaphor for rock and roll, folk music, whatever you want to call it,
right?
In itself, in the sense of like it starts out with just these inspired people who are brilliant and they're putting things together, and it's all kind of ad hoc, and people are coming and going, and it's inspirational, and just over time, commerce takes over, and it becomes something that's maybe less compelling, not worthy of commentary, or not less rich,
less interesting, and. I mean, it's an interesting timing for all of this because in the 70s, you are right in the middle of like the most egregious excesses of rock and roll,
right?
And specifically some of the bands you mentioned at the top about in your Christopher Nolan bit,
sure.
Like the prog rock is about to
Emerson, Lake and Palmer
are about to really force people to go. Okay, maybe I just need to listen to the Ramones play 30-minute concerts
or Patti Smith
or Patti Smith. Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, do you think? Is it possible, am I reading too much into this, that Bob and or Marty look at their own careers that way, in part, as like, well, I started out so young and vibrant, and then I mean, look, I personally, as a fan of both of these artists, I think they've done some of their best work in recent years, including this particular movie.
Right.
Which I think is one of Martin's Scorsese's. I call him Martin. We're good friends. We're not Marty friends.
Okay, not Marty.
No. I'm not trying. I'm just. We're Martin.
That's for Christopher Moltisanti outside of a club in Jersey.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, this came out the same year as The Irishman, which was this acclaimed. Won all these awards. Or nominated for all these awards.
This is better than The Irishman.
Yeah, and like everybody would say that in that year, not 2019. I was like, this is The Irishman is great, and it's the second best movie he made this year because the Rolling Thunder Revue, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, is so good.
Well, I mean, like I've thought about this movie 200 times since I first saw it, and I've thought about The Irishman about 12 times since I last saw it.
Right, I like The Irishman.
It's good.
I saw it.
Yeah.
I would watch it. I've only watched it once, but I would watch it again. But mostly when I think about it, I think like, the aging stuff looked kind of weird.
Yeah, right.
Or like, Ray Romano was in that. Like it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the ending of that movie I felt was very impactful. Right. But that's for the non-rock docs, The Irishman podcast, which we could,
Can I change gears? I want to bring somebody up
gears.
Here. All right, Scarlett Rivera.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So now like the four things that they've invented for this film, none of them nearly as interesting or as unbelievable as Scarlett Rivera.
Right.
If Scarlett Rivera was a creation, I would be like, man, Scorsese still got it. But like she's actually totally real.
Right.
And so I don't know how much.
Who is Scarlett Rivera?
I don't really know. She plays violin in this band, right? And she basically has. It seems like basically none of the other musicians on the tour knew much about her. Dylan found her.
Right.
She was a fascinating person. McGuinn said that she was like into like Santeria and stuff on the train or on the bus, and she was like, like burning stuff and very into these sort of mystical ideas, and that T-Bone at one point is watching it and just looks over at McGuinn and goes, "This on a bus to hell."
I mean, she definitely had a look that probably inspired the look of the tour. Like,
yes, she paints her face in a more interesting way than Bob has, even.
Right.
She also has a Blues for Allah logo on her violin.
Right. And I was wondering, like, was that Blues for Allah? Like, was that a Grateful Dead shout out on her violin, or was that image in the zeitgeist, like an image that people liked, and then the Dead used that for the Blues for Allah?
It's a good question, and all I can say is that 75 is the year that the Dead don't tour.
Right.
They only play like 2 or 3 shows the whole year, but they do record Blues for Allah that year.
Right.
So that's basically happening concurrently here.
So we've got a whole Dead weird thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think
all right. But
I think that's a Blues for Allah logo.
She shows up. She plays the violin on the tour. She plays the violin. All of like the sound of the Desire album, which is the same songs from this tour, is the violin. Like if you've heard, if you're not even that familiar with Bob, you've heard the song "Here Comes the Story of the Hurricane" on the radio. The whole thing is just wall to wall violin. That's her.
Yes, and so she's
and she rips. By the way,
she absolutely rips. We're talking about how good the Bob's band is. It's mostly her.
Right.
She's like more important than like Mick Ronson, honestly.
Yeah.
And she's also more visible. Like the staging of the band. She's front and center right there with Dylan. The only person who's anywhere near as visible is Joan Baez when she's up there too. And
getting funky.
And and she's just ripping. She's just all over the place. And she has a couple interviews that are very mystical and to the point that you would believe that they were a send-up.
Right.
You know, if everything about Scarlett Rivera was fictionalized, you'd be like, okay, they telegraphed that a little bit.
Right. But no. And she was on this tour, and then you kind of never heard from her again.
Yeah.
I did not know if she was alive or dead.
She's not like a famous musician.
She shows up in this documentary, again, in like contemporary footage being talked about it, and she's like, yeah, I was on this tour, and here's what happened.
Yeah.
And it's like... She just did her thing and then just went back off and like into the mists,
right,
to commune with the spirits or something. But it's awesome. If it wasn't for her, this whole thing would not work.
No, yeah, 100%. Yeah, because it would sort of just be like
dudes jamming on their guitars,
a bunch of guitars on stage. Yeah, right. Absolutely. So one other performance I absolutely adore is at the Mahjong Tournament.
Sure.
So the story of that, apparently, they're on Cape Cod, and they had booked this thing, and they get there, and there's a Mahjong Tournament booked at the Civic Center or Town Hall or whatever on the same day. And the organizers are basically like, they're not going to bother you. Don't worry about it. And Bob was like, well, I would kind of like to play to them. And so like it kind of became one event, and they just win. At least that's what Luke Kemp says in this interview.
Sure.
But so they have this performance that is much more stripped down. They don't have the whole stage set up. And they play Simple Twist of Fate. Mm-hmm. And Dylan has just like one key set up, and he's playing it, and it looks like an underproduced wedding band with a bad sound system.
Right.
And it is so good. It is so awesome. Like the vibes are through the roof, and it's just it's like, you know, the best sound system, the best stage setup, the most immaculate venue isn't worth anything compared to just the charisma of Bob Dylan in 1975,
Sure.
Which is just leaping out of the screen, even in these like lesser arrangements.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he just nails it, and it's like, it's amazing that this exists.
It is amazing that it exists. It would be like your like little neighborhood pub that's not really good at putting on concerts.
Right.
Put something together, and you're like, oh my, who is that? And it's like, oh, it's Bob Dylan in 1975 playing Simple Twist of Fate.
So, I mean, because some Bob fans just basically feel like this was a self-indulgent Martin Scorsese joint, as he says, and like it would have been better just to have like more or less a concert footage documentary. Like, I want to see all the concert footage, all the musical footage, maybe some of the contemporary interviews with the people talking about it, and like that would have been awesome. Like, you're still kind of hiding the ball a little bit.
I am hesitant to say, but I think I agree with them, only because I just don't get that much out of the little artistic flourishes that they've put in there. Like, I get it. You've got artistic license. That's fine. I'm not here to. I'm not upset about it. I'm not offended. But I just get so much less out of that. I have much less to say about it, and it's less interesting to me than just more tour footage, or more. Or, you know, one thing that McGuinn said is that, like, if there's anything he didn't think that the film captured so well was like how much damn fun they had. That, like, backstage was like. That it was like a family. And, you know, we hear Joni Mitchell passes through, and then she's so taken by the energy of this that she has to be a part of it. But you never really see anything that suggests to you that it would feel that way. In fact, most of the backstage stuff you get is like Larry Ratso complaining about how the poets are being treated. And he's like, what kind of tour is this? And, like some of the stuff with him, like, fighting with his Rolling Stone editors and, like, trying to get an interview with Bob Dylan.
All right,
like,
well, first of all,
yeah.
This made me really want the Larry Ratso Sloman documentary because I'm a fan of Ratso.
Okay.
And the guy is amazing,
Yeah.
and he's just been a fly on the wall for tons of rock history.
Yeah.
And just getting that taste of Ratso in this was like, give me more Ratso.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I'm just going to say.
All right. You're a Ratso guy. All right. That's fine.
Those are my guys.
Ratso
Bob Dylan and Larry Ratso.
And apparently Ratso was criticized for trying to impersonate Dylan too much.
Okay.
But
save that for the Ratso doc.
Yeah. But in any case, like, the first few times I watched this, I was, like, taken by how interesting it was that Dylan and Scorsese couldn't just do a straightforward documentary and what it was they were trying to say with all of these creative decisions that they made. And now a few times through, it's like, you didn't really do that much with those creative decisions that you've implemented, but you did take away 10 more minutes of concert footage or 10 more minutes of backstage footage that apparently would have shown that these people were in love with each other. I mean, that there was, like, a love affair going on between everybody on this tour, that they talk about it like it was one of the best times of their lives.
So let's just say that maybe this suffers, if at all, from the era that it was released. Because if it was released in the, 2004, in the DVD bonus footage era,
I would just
like,
have
you
10
bought,
more hours of footage.
Right. You would have bought, like, the 2-disc DVD set.
Yeah.
And, like, disc 1 would have been the movie, and you would have dug that. And then disc 2 would have just been, like, him performing whatever, another song from Blood on the Tracks or something.
Right.
And, Highway 61 Revisited.
Yeah.
And some random snippets of, Roger McGuinn BSing with Joni Mitchell backstage or whatever. And, like, that would have been great for you to throw on. But really, how many times are you going to watch that?
Once.
Okay.
Let's be honest. One time.
Like, of the era that you own those DVDs and you had those stacked up, on your bookshelf,
right?
How often were you actually going to disc 2?
Yeah, no, never. Yeah,
right.
One time.
Let's
maybe.
be real.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fair. I mean, I don't agree with the Dylan heads that it's like an indulgence of Scorsese and Dylan, but I do think it's like a weirdly distracting and has less to say than you would think, given what an off-the-wall decision it is.
Okay.
I mean, it's like
so you think I'm just reading into this whole, like, thematic stuff from Scorsese and it ties into his
I think
whole
that's
career?
real. I think that's real, but I don't think that Van Dorff and Giannopoulos and Sharon Stone move the ball in that direction at all. That's what's so amazing about it. None of those things are, like, propulsive in any way.
Listen, for the purpose of making this podcast interesting, I'm Team Van Dorff.
I mean, like, it's so wild. Like, 4 times they come back to Giannopoulos, and he's like, and then there were 6 more dates, like, geographically moving north to south. It's like his description is just describing how a tour works.
All right. So, okay, let's bring this to a satisfying conclusion, unlike the actual movie itself.
All right.
Which I love and I think is wonderful.
It's a work of art. Genuine.
And the question is, you're talking to somebody who is not a huge Dylan fan, take it or leave it, whatever, knows the hits, doesn't know anything about the Rolling Thunder Revue tour, whatever. Like, is this a movie you would recommend, or is this for the fans? Is this for, like, only... I mean, which is true of any rock doc.
Yeah.
That's the core question of the thesis of this podcast.
Yes, that is... I'm glad to hear that you think that, because that's why I'm doing this too.
We're not just here to BS about movies.
No, we're here to slowly build up towards finally discussing the history of the Eagles Part 2, and only the history of the Eagles Part 2, skipping right over the history of the Eagles Part 1.
Okay.
In the meantime, though, I'll go ahead and answer your question. This is for both. I think if you are a Dylan head, there's a lot here for you. And
clearly you have already seen it.
And you've already seen it, of course. And like, I think in 2019 when this came out, like, everyone I knew who was into Dylan at all, or music in general, was talking about this. And it deserved it. It deserved that much attention. And I think in that respect, the decision to make it not a straightforward documentary was an interesting one. But over time, I have less to say about that stuff, and more I'm just mesmerized by how good the concert footage is. And it's that concert footage and that backstage footage that I think would be interesting to somebody who doesn't like Dylan. Also, and we didn't say this, the charisma of Bob Dylan in this movie, the onstage charisma and the backstage charisma, is just off the charts. Just absolutely off the charts. Like, could have been a cult leader. Like, and in fact, there's some stuff that is like almost like when Joni Mitchell's hanging out backstage and he's like, "You need to come on stage right now," and she just like drops what she's doing and comes on stage with him. It's almost like, looks like he's starting a cult or something. Right. The way these people react to him and the way people look at him, the way the crowd is like living and dying by him. Even Joan Baez at one point says, they say like, what do you remember about the tour? And he's just like, well, I just remember the crowds would have like hurt themselves to get in to see Bob at that time.
Yeah. I mean, Scorsese has made multiple movies with Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Leonardo DiCaprio, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
Go down the line. Harvey Keitel.
Yeah.
Like, in some sense, I think this version of Bob Dylan is the most charismatic and compelling character in a Martin Scorsese movie.
Yes.
Like, Travis Bickle, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Great, Taxi Driver, Raging, whatever.
Yeah. This is it.
It almost is like he's pinning the needle here in terms of like a compelling screen presence. Just like every second that he's on the screen is like it's like how is this even captured?
Yes.
How is this possible?
Yeah. How could one person be so interesting?
Right.
Honestly,
exactly.
Like everything he's doing is fascinating to me. Every decision, it's like, wow, what is Bob thinking about that?
Right. Yeah. You can not like his voice.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
But he's not boring.
No one has ever. I want to meet that person. Email me if you're like, my take on Bob Dylan is like
Andrew Keatts.
There's just not much to him. The guy has very much less to say and even less to do.
Yeah, every time he was on screen, I was like, more Van Dorf. Yeah. All right. I mean, I get off on the the kind of weird puzzle aspect of it. I enjoy it. Maybe I'll watch it several more times and feel like, okay, I've got enough of that. I don't know. But yeah, bottom line is the music and the performances are so good that none of that matters. And
I feel like that is like an absolute cost of doing business for any rock doc.
Right.
If the musical performances don't rope me in, if I can't put it on because I've already seen it 5 times and go do the dishes and just be happy that it's on in the same room as me, not that interested in your rock doc.
Right. Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, it could be an artist that you don't even really know that much about or care that much about, but like it's got to be compelling footage.
Right.
And on that level, I would say
it's
Rolling Thunder Revue,
like maybe
a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, delivers the goods.
Yes, that's right.
All right, we did it. Rock Docs.
Episode 1 of
question mark.
Yeah,
like a tweet thread. 1/? Question mark.
That's right.
Later.